In this tutorial, we're going to complete all of the parts for the draw, including the base. Okay, so this is where we got to in the previous tutorial. We got a side done and we got sort of half the front done. So as we've done before, we're going to mirror that. So we'll go down to mirror and we just want to make sure that we've got our object type selected as bodies. Okay, so we'll select our body and then we want to select our mirror plane. So we'll just change our view so we can actually see it. So it's that surface there. And our operation in this case is join. Okay. So you can see it up there as body 5. So we're just going to now create it, turn it into a component. So there it is. And we might as well rename it now and we'll call it draw front. Okay, so that's now done. Okay, so the next thing we'll do, before we actually mirror this one across, we're just going to put some housings in for the base. And I'm going to show you a different way that we can actually do that. Now, generally, in the workshop, you would cut a housing for a draw base, most efficiently on a table saw. But of course, students generally can't use the table saw. So you could have them use a router as well. Although, sometimes it's a bit of a toss-up. Sometimes it is just easier just to cut it on the table saw. Okay, I'm just going to hide the draw front for now. And I'll come in on this draw side here. Particularly what I want to do is I just want to talk about where we put the housing through. And generally what you want to do is you want to bring the housing through this tail here somewhere. One of the beauties of having a false front on a dovetail draw means that it'll cover over any sort of groove that appears at the front here. So I'm just going to use my inspect tool. So keyboard shortcut is I, and just measure this distance here. So that's 6.47 millimeters. So let's work to 6.5 millimeters. Now the reality is, okay, we've got that dimension, but when it comes to what that ends up being in the workshop, you really just have to have a look at what you've cut here and just locate it so that it goes through this tail here. So we want to create a new sketch, and this inside face is going to be our sketch plane. R for rectangle. Just going to move that across a little bit. And we'll create our rectangle. It's going to go the full length. And we want that first dimension, which you can see out there on the left-hand side, that's going to be 4 millimeters because we're going to slide a 4 millimeter piece of plywood into the base. So that's 4 millimeters. Then tab 338. Okay, so it's running the full length. There we go. Just pan that across a bit more. Now the other thing we want to do is D for dimension. We just want to set that distance off the base there. So we'll make it 6.5. There we go. But like I said, when you're in the workshop, you'll actually adjust for what's real in the real world. Okay, so we'll finish that sketch. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to cut that housing. And I'm going to show you a different way of doing that. Now, a good general rule of thumb, if you're cutting a housing for a draw base or something like that, the depth of the housing should be somewhere between 1/3 of the thickness of the piece that you're cutting it into through to 1/2. No more and generally no less. So obviously this material thickness here is 12 millimeters thick, but that's defined by a parameter and that parameter can change. So what we can do is instead of saying, look, I want to cut it half the, half of whatever that dimension is there. So that'll be 6 millimeters deep. I can actually create a really simple formula so that it calculates it, but also it means if I change that parameter, it'll change the depth as well, according to the rule. So this is where we're starting to sort of think parametrically so that we can actually create a complex model that we can change all these different parameters on and everything else adjusts. Now at the moment, and when we get to the very end of these tutorials, I'm going to show you, we're going to change some of those parameters and see what works and see what doesn't. Because at the moment, we're not 100% working parametrically, but we're getting there. Okay, so I want to extrude, select the surface that I'm extruding. So it's going to be minus draw material thickness divided by 2. So it's actually automatically calculated that and made that a 6mm deep cut. But like I said, if you change the draw thickness, it will change that automatically. And also, if you decide that you want to go 1/3 of the depth, then it's just divided by 3. So we just make sure our operation is cut and we go OK. So we've got our housing in our side there. Now we're going to turn our front back on, and we're going to do the same here for the draw front. New sketch. This is our sketch plane. I'm going to keep the side visible because we can actually reference off that. It saves us a little bit of a step. So R for rectangle. And if I come in really close, I'm actually going to reference off that bottom corner there. So we know 276 is right. Tab 4. Enter. There we go. So we'll finish that sketch. Just bring it across again. Same again. So we're going to extrude, select what we want to extrude, minus draw material thickness divided by 2. And that's a cut. We've basically finished. No, we actually haven't finished yet all of the geometry on the draw side. So there's one more thing we're going to do. And what we're going to do is we've got to have a back, but we're going to do a technique where basically we're going to use a router to cut a housing that's going through the side piece here, and we're going to basically slide the back piece in. So we better sort of create the geometry for that. Now, instead of creating a new sketch, what I can do is this is where I can actually go back, use this timeline, and I can go back on my timeline and go and modify this earlier sketch, which is actually a more efficient way of doing it. So if I go just left click on that, right click, edit sketch, it takes me back in. R for rectangle, and we're just going to go the full width, so that's 87mm. Tab, and again, this is going to be draw material thickness, so it's going to be 12mm. Okay, so we've got our rectangle, and what I want is I want that to be set 19mm in from the back there. Look, generally with housings like this, you don't want to put them too close to the back, because what it means, it makes that timber there quite weak and can chip out fairly easily. So D for dimension. So I would tend to say, 19 to 20mm, but in this case, I'm going to match Marty's design, and he's got 19mm. So we'll finish that sketch, which it just disappeared on us. So we just need to identify it. So that's sketch 11, and we'll just turn it back on so we can see it. Extrude, select, but we've also got to select down here. Now, theoretically, you could stop that, but it's just easier to route all the way through. So use our little our shift key to add to the selection, and we're going to use our same formula, minus draw material thickness divided by 2, and it just means that everything will match up perfectly. Now that's a cut. Okay, so there we go. You can see that's there. So you can see how sometimes actually accessing the timeline down here, particularly as the project gets more complicated, gets better and better. Now we've done that, let's just complete these parts here. So I'll turn these sketches off. So basically what I want to do now is create a mirror. And in this case, the object type is now going to be components. So this is the component. And the mirror plane, got to zoom out a bit. Now I might just pan up a bit. Again, this is just the beauty of how we set this up in the beginning. It just makes it so much easier. That's our mirror plane. Okay, there we go. So we didn't have to create that side again. The next thing we can do is we can just very quickly create this back piece. Before we do, let's get a little bit of information off our drawing here. So we want our back piece to be flush here and go all the way down, but basically finish at this point here. So what we can do, we can literally just click on that, and you'll see down here, by clicking on that, that gives us this information, 76 0.5 millimeters. The other way you can do it, again, is using the inspect tool, because it doesn't always work so neatly. And I can just select there and select there, and you'll see I'm getting the same information. New sketch, and I'm actually just going to work off the top of one of these drawers. R for rectangle. I'm going to reference that corner there. And I'm going to reference this corner here. Now that should be 288 millimeters. So I don't need to go all the way in. So, but what I do want to do is see how it's 12 millimeters over there. I'm just going to do draw material thickness again. Even though it's the same number, it just means that if I change that parameter, it will change this automatically. So draw material thickness, and then that's going to be tab 288. Enter. Okay, so we'll finish that sketch. Now we want to extrude off this profile, and we're going to go down, and we're going to go minus 76.5, because that was the measurement we got last time. Now we don't want join, because again, it's a separate piece of wood in the real world. New component. Okay, now just to check, we can come in really close here and make sure that that actually does match up there. Let's just get that back in the middle of the screen. Now the final thing we want to do is we want to do the base for the draw, and it's kind of starting to get a little bit complicated now in terms of how we could do the draw. So I'm going to show you just a different technique where sometimes, like so far what we've been doing is we've been kind of drawing everything in place as it would be in place. But in this case, what I'm going to do is we're actually going to draw the draw base down here and then put it in place. So it's just a slightly different technique. So I'm just going to hide some components. Oh, actually, while I'm here, I might as well just go rename that one. So I'll call that draw back. There we go. And then I'm going to hide that. Okay, so what I want a couple of measurements. Now, I probably already can remember them, but just to be 100% sure, we're going to use our inspect tool again. So and I want the total width of the draw base. So from there to there, basically the bottom of the housing, 288. Now in the real world, you might cut this at about 287 or 286. That's ideal. It's not actually good practice to do perfect sizing for it, just to allow for a little bit of timber movement. But in this case, we'll do it perfect size. So we've got 288 there. Now the other measurement that we want is we want to go from the bottom of that housing all the way through to the back here. So there's a couple of ways we can do it. So again, I'll just type letter I and go from there to, and if I just actually go to that corner there, that's 326. But remember that housing is 6 millimeters deep, but it's also a parameter that needs to change. So I'm going to show you a kind of a clever way of creating that dimension. So we've got 326 and 288 is the other one. So what we'll do now, new sketch, and we're actually going to sketch right down here on the bottom, just to make things a little bit easier. R for rectangle. And our first dimension is our tricky one. So it's going to be 326 plus draw material thickness divided by 2. So we get 332. And so again, what that means is that as we change those parameters, this will also correct itself. Now, I did press enter a little bit quickly, so I'm going to just put in that second dimension, and that was the one that we measured, and so that was 288. So we've got there's our sort of sketch of our draw base. So we'll pan that up. Now obviously we now just need to give it its thickness. Now we could give it a parameter, but for this case, there's only one draw base, so it's 4 millimeters. And we want, as the operation, we want a new component. And while we're here, good practice, rename draw base. So as I said before, we were going to do a different technique for putting this in place. So we'll put in the draw front and the draw side for this one. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to use the assemble function now. So we're going to join it. Keyboard shortcut there is J. So all I need to do is really just go, look, where on this is there a known point? It's basically going to join a known point to a known point. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come in really close to this corner here and get it so that I've got the blue going up, the red going out that way, and I'm going to click right on that corner point. Then I'm going to come up here, basically to the corresponding point up here, and make sure that see how that can change alignment depending on what face I'm referencing. I'm just going to make sure that that blue is pointing up. All right, and let's go. Now, obviously there's some other adjustments you can do here, but this one should be pretty straightforward. So we just go OK, and then we'll zoom out and we'll have a look and see how it looks. There we go. It's looking pretty good. So there is our draw now done. Now, as before, we've got a few sort of extra parts here. So let's be, good managers of our of all of our components, and we're going to create a new component, and we're going to call it draw assembly. So there it is there. And then what we can do is we can just now get all of our pieces for our draw. So we'll select draw false front and then hit shift and go to draw base. Then we're just going to drag all of that into draw assembly. There you go. So we've kind of neatened up our sort of all of our pieces over here, made it a bit neater. Now in the next tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a traditional turned shaker design knob or pull for the draw.